Help support AMTV by becoming a patron, an AMTV staff member, and following us over on Twitter.
After the break, the late film is Hector Babenco's Pisciotti, a brilliant, chilling study of São Paulo's juvenile criminal population, orphaned, unwanted, and living beyond and beneath the reach of the law. The film carries this triangular symbol to indicate that it paints an unsentimental and unglamorized picture of a horrific world.
Channel 4 was different, and Channel 4 always wanted to be different from the very beginning. From its earliest days in late 1982, the new challenger to British TV aimed to stand out from the big boys of the telly world in whatever way it could. And you may be familiar with its iconic idents, or its unusual bouts of continuity, or even the banger of a theme song it had for the first decade of its life. But one avenue in which Channel 4 would aim to stand out, quite controversially, would be via the showcase of, shall we say, more adult-orientated programming. This is the story and the enduring fascination of the Red Triangle series.
If you stock any of the 62 titles on a list circulated by Scotland Yard, you could end up in court.
Take yourself back to the mid-1980s. When it came to certain elements in films such as sex and violence, the Western world was still dipping its toes. Movies had embraced these elements more blatantly, for sure, but in the realm of UK television, broadcasters up to then had been reluctant to show any films that were overtly sexual or violent for fear of backlash or believing it didn't fit their channels or their audiences. There were also consistent concerns from the various bodies that oversaw the industry, such as the Independent Broadcasting Authority, who ensured the ITV network was running smoothly. Channel 4 would also fall under the IBA and aim to challenge the authority and any kind of TV censors when it came to what they wished to show. They began negotiations with the IBA, pitching to them that they wished to show a selection of cult or art house style films. Movies which weren't typically mainstream attractions, but often gained their own popularity from the themes they portrayed or the way in which they were put together. It's worth noting that all films suggested had previously screened in British cinemas under the X rating, a rating modern audiences would be more familiar seeing as an 18. However, whilst not strictly banned, these films had never been shown on British television before. Seemingly, the IBA eventually agreed to Channel 4 showing these films, though there would be one major element they would have to incorporate in a big way to make sure audiences were fully aware of what they were about to see. In the eyes of Channel 4, audiences clearly weren't ready to go into these kinds of avant-garde films without some kind of warning. Thus, those who stayed up past midnight to check out these movies would consistently see the presence of this red triangle, which advised that special discretion was required.
As you can see, the film carries the triangular warning symbol, which suggests that special discretion should be used when deciding whether or not to watch it. It's a bleak portrait of a harsh and violent society.
The Channel 4 red triangle has become something of a fascinating symbol of classic television, even though it can easily be mistaken for a road sign. In fact, that partly inspired its design, as here in the UK, most of our warning signs you'll see on the roads are in the shape of a triangle with a red border and a white centre. Starting in the autumn of 1986, the first film that would see the use of the red triangle would be the early 70s French surrealist comedy, Themrock. Let's have a look and see how Channel 4 introduced the red triangle concept to its viewers.
From time to time, in the late evening, Channel 4 transmits films made for the cinema, which some viewers may find a bit strong for television. From now on, as an experiment, we'll be using this triangular warning symbol before and during films which include explicit material. If there is one coming, you will see this triangle and the words "special discretion required." The triangle will stay on your screen throughout those films. After each commercial break, "special discretion required" will come up again before the film continues. The triangle is to warn that care is required. You may then decide not to watch a film which might offend you or a member of your family. We hope that this will help you enjoy your viewing on Channel 4.
Okay, well, that seems pretty straightforward. A standard warning, essentially covering Channel 4's backs in the event that someone complains about a film's content. The broadcast of Themrock drew outcry from some corners, including some newspaper outlets, as well as everyone's favourite televisual guardian, Mary Whitehouse. For context, Mrs. Whitehouse had a long history at protesting about what could be and what was shown on television. She's well known amongst fans of the BBC sci-fi series Doctor Who, where her frequent criticisms of the programme's content would roll the eyes of the fandom, but occasionally have an impact. Take this cliffhanger from the 1976 story The Deadly Assassin, starring Tom Baker as the Doctor. The episode ends with the Doctor being drowned, the final image being a freeze frame of the Doctor's face beneath the water. From Mrs. Whitehouse's complaining, backed by her National Viewers and Listeners Association, they managed to get a response from the Director General of the BBC itself. Not only that, but the final few seconds of the episode were erased from the master tape, surviving only thanks to a recording made in America. Mary Whitehouse's complaints would also change the entire tone of Doctor Who for the remainder of the 70s, so when it worked, her influence could have pretty far-reaching consequences. However, by the mid-80s, things were very different. Audiences had arguably become a lot more used to sex and violence playing a part within their media, whether it be at the cinema or at home on the television. When it came to Channel 4's Red Triangle films, any attempt to dissuade people from watching seemed to fall flat. Themrock was shown after midnight, but still managed to draw in around 2 million viewers, a great result for what was still a relatively new time slot in British television. 24-hour broadcasting was only starting to be embraced by various corners of the ITV network, and the BBC's transition to this model was still many years away. Thus, the early hours of the morning had become something of a graveyard in the realm of TV, with nothing too interesting being shown to entice viewers to stay up that little bit longer. The Red Triangle films challenged that perception immensely, with most screens receiving around 2 million or sometimes even 3 million viewers. The Red Triangle warning only seemed to act as more of an enticement, sparking the curiosity of the late-night viewer, seemingly promising a certain kind of excitement or entertainment. Although in some cases, despite raunchy promos in the listings magazines and the outcry of the detractors, some of these films were genuine art cinema, and gained a new appreciation from the Brits who stayed up to tune into them. The 10 films that were aired as part of the Red Triangle series on Channel 4 were as follows: Themrock, Pastoral Hide and Seek, Throw Away Your Books, Rally in the Streets, Identification of a Woman, Pisciotte, The Clinic, Montenegro, Di Beruta, Out of the Blue, and The Wall. Many of these would find an audience of those who had a genuine interest in the art house cinema scene, and also some who tuned in with the promise of something a bit more raunchy, with mixed results depending on the film. It was quite groundbreaking for its time, as Channel 4 was showcasing films that the BBC and ITV would normally stay well clear of. However, not everybody loved the Red Triangle. For as described, it wasn't just shown before a film began and between the ad breaks, but remained in the top corner of the screen for the duration of said film. In Channel 4's eyes, you could argue that this makes sense, for anyone tuning in partway through can be made aware that this is a programme that may potentially offend or upset them. On the flip side, many viewers found it distracting and annoying to have constantly on their screen. More seriously, certain advertisers were refusing to showcase their products in the breaks of the films, and as any commercially funded broadcaster will tell you, if the advertisers aren't coming, you have a pretty big problem. Negative comments from newspapers and other detractors continued, and as viewing figures steadily declined, perhaps because some audiences discovered some of these films weren't as outrageous as they were purported to be, the future of the Red Triangle series was far from being set in stone. The sweeping presence of the Red Triangle was duly debated on Channel 4's viewers programme, Right to Reply, first in the closing months of 1986, and then again in the spring of 1987, where channel controller, Paul Bonner, appeared to explain the research and findings of both the channel and IBA into the Red Triangle experiment. If this was an attempt to try and silence critics of the Strand, and the Red Triangle branding in particular, it didn't have much impact. By the summer of 1987, a statement was duly issued from a Channel 4 spokesperson, which was published in the Guardian newspaper. In regards to the Red Triangle, it stated that the symbol would be retained throughout at the top left-hand corner of all films whose sexual content, language, or violence might offend some viewers. The triangle would not be shown in the TV Times or on the screen until immediately before the film started. Furthermore, it stated that Channel 4 would still do its best to describe such films in pre-publicity, but that it had no plans for screening any such late-night films in the current year's schedules. And thus, rather unceremoniously, the Red Triangle strand in its original form was quietly discontinued.
When your parents got you a TV, and it was that first one, how delighted were you? When you got your first TV and you could go in your bedroom and watch it, nobody could bother you, and you could watch whatever you want, including Channel 4's late-night Red Triangle series. Now, that's when they came into their own.
The Red Triangle was essentially an experiment, a test by Channel 4 to see just how far it could push the boundaries as to what was deemed acceptable for broadcast on British television. It can be lauded for giving the spotlight to many foreign films, some of which are generally praised amongst cinemagoers. And despite only lasting on screens for less than a year, the impact it had on the future of programming cannot be overlooked. Nearly 10 years later, in the mid-90s, Channel 4 would introduce the Red Light Zone, a strand of programming that aimed to show more adult-themed content, somewhat arguably more sexual in nature than the Red Triangle days. This trend has continued into modern-day television, with Channel 4 and its later competitor Channel 5 being cited and often criticised for showcasing programming that is more sexual in nature. Though, admittedly, the outrage surrounding sex on television has rapidly diminished over the last few decades. Could you imagine if something like Naked Attraction had been shown back in the 1980s? Mary Whitehouse would have probably keeled over.
As we're ticking on towards 1:45, I'd just like to grab this moment to say that if you missed last Sunday's episode of Mr. Pie, try to catch it tomorrow at 10 o'clock.
Whilst art house films still crop up on television now and then, back in the days where traditional telly ruled the airwaves, Channel 4 gave them a goldmine of an opportunity. The chance for millions to see these flicks for the first time, even if they were on in the early hours of the morning. And yes, the presence of that red triangle may have been distracting, annoying, or even outright condescending to some, but it's since gone on to be recognised as a fun little piece of televisual history. A piece of iconography that is both synonymous with Channel 4 and also the spirit of its earliest years, when showcasing the avant-garde and maybe even a little risque was all part of the broadcaster's bread and butter.
Many of you may have seen the red triangle in the corner of your screen. This indicates that the program may accidentally cause offence.
And this symbol indicates that the program may deliberately cause offence.
Thank you to our patrons for helping to support the show, and a special thank you to Macra, Bruce Danton, Derek Chambers, Shaun Knock, Daud Khan, Liam De-Maine, AJ Mac 200017, Deck, Jen, Traffy, Tim Ripley, Mr. Eurovision 1986, Ted Elliott, Marnanel Thurman, John Wakefield, Kieran Bolton, 40-something Manchild, Jerry Ralph, John McLeod, Subs Khan, Saint Rocket 9, James Wallace, and Ben, our AMTV staff members.